So we're going to talk about the second president of the United States today, President John Adams. He is a one-term president, and he is a Federalist Party member. Remember, the Federalists and the Democrat-Republicans were... All right, we're going to talk about the second president of the United States today, President John Adams. President Adams is a Federalist Party member. He is the only Federalist Party member that gets to be president, and he will be president from 1796 to 1800. Remember, the election is in 1796. You actually swear into office the following year. So he is a one-term president. And who does he follow? George Washington. You know, one of the most loved presidents in American history. So this guy's got it bad because of that. You know, when you follow a really well-loved person, people are going to judge you, and he's being judged by, like, the perfect standard for a president. So he, before the presidency, is someone that you kind of do need to know. He is one of our founding fathers who probably doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. But before the presidency, he is a lawyer in Boston. And why he's a lawyer in Boston, he is going to write letters against the Stamp Act. Remember that Stamp Act Congress that opposes this tax. He doesn't necessarily oppose the tax, but what he opposes is being taxed without consent. So he actually does, in his letters, he talks about how the colonies don't have representation in Parliament. And remember, that's going to be the big, slogan that they're all going to use is no taxation without representation. Why he's in Boston serving and building up his, little law office, the Boston Massacre occurs. And when the Boston Massacre occurs, you have colonists dead and soldiers, British soldiers, who have been housed in the city, who have fired on them. And John Adams decides to go ahead and represent the soldiers. So not real well loved because of that, but he felt convicted to do it. And so he actually is a very effective lawyer, and he gets his clients off. So the British soldiers are found not guilty, remember, in the trial. And this is something that Thomas Jefferson is going to pinpoint in the Declaration of Independence. He's talking about that fake trial. He says it wasn't a legit trial. But remember, the soldiers are being tried in a military court, not a civilian court. So there's a little bit of difference in how things are viewed. Different courts, different kind of interpretations of stuff. And his cousin is Sam Adams, one of the founding fathers, but one of the founding members of the Sons of Liberty. So, a little bit of conflict there, but they both agree that separation from England is coming. So they agree on that. Now, as a founding father, he is at a lot of the government stuff, and that is really where John Adams is going to really prevail. He is not a soldier, even though he kind of longs to be, and he really admires Washington as it. But he is a guy who is really a politician, a lawyer. He is good at the law. He's good at arguing the law. So he actually represents at the First Continental Congress. And why he's there, he agrees, let's, send some letters about no representation. But he believes in the back of his mind, and he kind of tells people privately, that separation is coming, that we will break up with England. And then he serves during the Second Continental Congress a lot. He is all over the place during the Second Continental Congress. Remember, the Second Continental Congress is the one that goes ahead and appoints George Washington as the commander-in-chief. They're the ones who go ahead and write a lot of petitions and stuff, but they are basically the one that governs this country during the war. Now, during the American Revolutionary War, he kind of has this bromance with Washington. This is where he kind of starts idolizing this guy. And, apparently spell check won't recognize bromance, but that's cool. When you look at his bromance, here's this guy who, is everything that he's not. He's a great military leader. He's tall. John Adams is kind of short. And, there's a little bit of that. But he does believe that Washington is the perfect choice as commander-in-chief, and so he actually nominates him to be commander-in-chief of the American Continental Army. And later he will serve as Washington's vice president. So he will actually serve as the first VP of our country. And we talked about that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it here. He helped Thomas Jefferson with the Declaration of Independence. Actually, they thought, and Thomas Jefferson thought, John Adams should write the Declaration of Independence. Adams says no. He says, I think Thomas Jefferson needs to write it. He's a Virginia man. This needs to be coming from Virginia, and not from Boston lawyer. So they're a part of this committee of 5. And here is Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson writing the actual declaration. Now, Thomas Jefferson really kind of finalizes it, but they're proofing it. Remember, there are lots of drafts. The final one is adopted by the Continental Congress, or by the Second Continental Congress on July 4th. Okay. He worked about 18 hours a day during the war. They kind of nickname him the War Machine. He does a lot. He negotiates a lot. He works towards an alliance with France. He does a lot with financing and getting us help during this Revolutionary War. As vice president, he serves as Washington's VP for 2 terms, and he kind of defines the role of what it means to be a vice president. The Constitution really doesn't have a very broad or in-depth description of what the VP is supposed to do. He's supposed to, cast a vote if there's a tiebreaker in the Senate. So he serves as President pro temp in the United States Senate. And anytime that there is a tie, you got, today it would be 50-50. But back then, not so. But if you had 50-50 yes and 50 no, then the vice president will throw his vote in, and he will be the tiebreaker. When you look at tiebreakers throughout history, John Adams is like at the second one. He cast 29 tiebreakers for President Washington. He joins the Federalist Party with Hamilton. He doesn't really have that much of a romance, kind of with Hamilton. He doesn't have a bromance there. They kind of are at conflict a lot with views. He has a big personality. The other guy has a big personality. And sometimes 2 big personalities can't fit in the same room together. But he does become a Federalist Party member, and he becomes the leader of the Federalist Party because he's going to be the president next. In the election of 1796, you have John Adams, a Federalist, versus the other guy, Thomas Jefferson, who's a Democrat-Republican. Now, there are other people running, but these are your top 2 vote getters, pretty much. But these are your more well-known founding fathers. There's a bunch of other ones running, but here are your 2 who are your top ones. How the Electoral College worked back then and how it works today is different. Back then, whoever got the most votes got to be the president. So in this case, you have Federalist John Adams over here with 51% or 71 electoral votes. And Thomas Jefferson had 49% or 68% or 68 votes, electoral votes. So what ends up happening back then is the guy who's your runner-up or the first loser becomes your vice president. And this is an issue in this 1796, whereas it wasn't an issue in 1792 or 1788, because when you look at this election, we have 2 political parties that are very distinct. Remember, the 2-party system is actually established during Washington's time as president. This is the actual election that, you kind of see where this whole electoral college isn't going to work unless you fix it. So Adams wins, and he has a vice president of a different political party. Now remember, elections, you are going head-to-head, fighting each other for who's going to get to be the winner. And so Thomas Jefferson and John Adams have to be bigger men and put aside those differences. And I mean, they were throwing some punches in the election. They have to put aside those differences to work together now as a team. And it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. This election shows us the need to go ahead and have the 12th Amendment. Okay? So, we've had the first 10 passed under Washington. We have an 11th Amendment that's already been passed. We had to fix something there. And now we got the 12th Amendment. So the 12th Amendment says the president has a running mate. So when you cast a vote for the president, you cast a vote at the same time for their running mate, their choice, their VP. And so you get like a 2-in-1 kind of vote. So we just had our election, in 2016. When people cast their vote for the president, okay, they also cast their vote at the same time for the vice president. So the president today is President Trump. His vice president is Mike Pence. You couldn't say, hey, let's go ahead and try and see how this is going to work. We'll put Trump as the president, and we'll put Hillary Clinton as the vice president. Think about how the election has gone, and think about how those two would operate in the White House together. I mean, they're not. And it's the same thing with John Adams and his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. They're not going to flow. They're going to be at odds. The vice president's job is basically a hype man's job. You're supposed to hype up the president's agenda. You're supposed to go where the president can't go. And instead of hyping up the president, what Thomas Jefferson basically does is he runs to be the president for the next 4 years. And he might not be doing it all himself, but his supporters certainly are. So every time Adams does something, the people who prefer Thomas Jefferson are going to be out there saying, Jefferson would do it better. If he was president, we wouldn't have this law, or we wouldn't have this incident. So this isn't really going to work very well, and that's why we're going to fix it with the 12th Amendment. It might be entertaining for a day, but it's not going to be great for 4 years. Remember, the presidency helps this country. So the president, his first challenge as president is his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. He's not okay with losing. His supporters aren't okay with him losing, and he does not support the agenda of the current president, John Adams. And there's a lot of criticism that's going to happen. And because you keep getting those criticisms, you're eventually going to get this Alien and Sedition Act that's going to get passed in a little bit, okay? But the office of the vice president is supposed to be helping the president carry out the responsibilities of the job. So first challenge really kind of to John Adams' presidency is this XYZ affair, where there's kind of a quasi-war between the United States and France right now. France is going through the revolution. They're a little bit upset because we've proclaimed our neutrality. We're not taking sides in this stuff. And France is going out on the Atlantic Ocean and taking our boats. So they're seizing U.S. merchant ships. Adams decides to send a diplomatic team to negotiate with the French government. So he sends his best guys, his A-team, and they go over there. And when they get to France, 3 French guys approach them, and they demand money. They say, if you want to speak to our government, you gotta pay us. You gotta grease our palms. Give us some money. And our ambassadors and our government, we don't work that way. We don't pay to speak to another government. It's just not how U.S. politics works. So our guys come back. They tell the story, and the public is outraged. The public is calling for war against France. And even though President Adams does have a little bit of a temper, he actually says, we can't do it. If we do it, we're going to lose. We don't have a navy, which he'll fix, but he sends another team to go ahead and speak to the French government. So he kind of calms us down. There are some side effects, though, and we'll look at that in the next slide. But if you look here, this is a political cartoon created by the British. This person right here is America. These people plucking her feathers, these 5 French guys, are that XYZ affair kind of guys. They're plucking our feathers. They're embarrassing us, This looks bad to us, and Britain loves it because, they're still upset about this whole war. When another country asks you to pay them to talk to them, it kind of looks like they don't respect you and they don't see you as an equal as far as the government goes. So Britain's making fun of us in this political cartoon that they created. The French guys are plucking our feathers. And so I'm going to pause it here, and we're going to move to the second part, what this does to the nation.